Hey guys, welcome back to another great game of CEDH. Starting us off is Gabe on Derevi. One of the OG commanders is back, and this staxy commander has only gotten better since they printed the One Ring. Armed with a powerful stax package such as Winter Orb and Stasis, this deck can really take control of a board state. Next up is Hidden Planet X on Slicer. The epitome of aggro, this killer robot is here for blood. With a pinch of stacks and an equipment sub-package, this deck is all about speed and momentum, killing your opponents before they can even get set up. In the third spot is Dan on Jeska Ishai.
Welcome, punch!
The murder bird is back and ready for blood. Ready to beat face or combo kill with Jeska, this deck can certainly pack a punch. And bringing up the rear is Gunner on Kinnan. This is big mana Kinnan. Whether it be through Kinnan activations or just hardcasting him, this deck has both speed and inevitability when it comes to just big impactful creatures, while always allowing you to backdoor into combo lines to finish an unsuspecting table.
Alright, block there, kill that. Oh, that is trample. Guess I'm just dead on board.
Well, I'm back from SCG Hartford and man was it a blast. I recorded almost 30 games, so I hope you like watching some CEDH gameplay, cause I've got plenty to bring you in the future. And to everyone that I met and played games with, thank you so much for coming up and talking to me. But without further ado, let's get on to the gameplay. Gabe mulls to 5. Gabe has a very fast turn, just playing out a snow-covered island. Hidden starts with a Hammerheim and a Mana Crypt, which gives him the 3 mana he needs to cast the backside of Slicer. Heading to combat, Hidden sends Slicer at Dan for 3, transforming the robot at end of combat, and handing the turn over after that. Dan on his upkeep gets Slicer and plays a Scalding Tarn as land. Cracking the fetch, he grabs out a Tundra and uses it for a Mystic Remora. Ending his turn, he casts Slicer sideways at Gunner for 6. Gunner has a command tower and taps it for a Spring Leaf Trum, following that up with a Mox Opal. And it looks like Slicer has actually helped him more than hurt him, as he now has Metalcraft and can tap Slicer to pay for Kinnan. Also, he does feed 2 cards to Dan off the fish, but Kinnan is good. Gabe gets Slicer on his turn and plays a Simic Growth Chamber. He bounces his island and then moves to combat, sending Slicer at Dan. Hidden takes 3 from his crypt and casts a Jeska's Will. Gives Dan a card and then gains 8 red and 3 cards to exile. Hidden then casts a Lightning Greaves and pays for fish. He equips his commander and then plays a City of Traders as land. A Rite of Flame then comes out, giving Dan a draw, with Hidden then casting his Spiteful Banditry, where X equals 2. Dan draws and the enchantment resolves, taking Kinnan out. This also gives Hidden a treasure, with him ending his turn sending Slicer at Dan for 6. Dan untaps and lets his fish go and gets Slicer. He plays a Bloodstained Mire and cracks it to grab out a Volcanic Island. Tapping 2, he casts a Dockside Extortionist, with the only response being Hidden cracking his treasure. Dan gets 5 total treasures.
I feel like I'm gonna die soon. Anyways.
On his turn,
probably. I gotta do something.
Dan spends 3 of his treasures on a Heuristic Study and ends his turn with combat, sending 6 at Kinnan, and having to discard 2 cards due to hand size. Gunner gets Slicer, plays an Exotic Orchard, and then taps 4 for the One Ring. Dan gets a draw and the ring resolves, getting Gunner protection until his next turn. Gabe gets Slicer and plays a Deserted Temple as land for turn. He can tap his Growth Chamber for a Simic and then spend a blue to untap his lands, netting him 2 green and a blue. He casts an Elvish Mystic and a Carpet of Flowers, paying for 1 of the 2 Heuristic triggers. He then heads to combat and sends an ineffective Slicer at Gunner, and due to the protection, blanks the Slicer. Then on his second main, Gabe activates the Carpet for 2 blue to cast a Winter Orb. Dan draws, and Gabe is done after that, with Hidden at his end step casting a Pyrokinesis. He pitches a Thunderclap and puts 2 damage on the Dockside and the Mystic. Dan draws, but the damage happens, triggering Hidden's banditry to gain him another treasure. Hidden untaps his Heimerheim and takes 3 from his crypt. He starts off with combat, deciding he wants to try and take Dan out, who responds with a consider. He mills a ponder, and even with all the cards he's drawn, has no more responses and is taken out with commander damage. Hidden hands the turn over, with Gunnar tapping his One Ring to draw his card at end step. Gunnar untaps, gets Slicer, and takes 1 from the ring. He then taps it to draw 2 cards and plays a Chromox, imprinting a Tidespout Tyrant. An Ancient Tune then comes out as land for turn, and tapping out, Gunnar casts a Consecrated Sphinx. Gabe gets Slicer, and it's kind of funny, with Hidden taking out Dan, it drops the island count to 0, so Gabe's carpet no longer produces mana. Gabe draws her turn, with Gunnar getting 2 more cards off the Consecrated Sphinx. Gabe then replays his snow-covered island and then moves to combat. He sends Slicer at Gunnar, who trades it for the Sphinx. Hidden does get another treasure, with Gabe being done after that. Hidden finally wins a crypt roll, and then for 5 recasts the backside of Slicer. He re-equips his Greave and then sends his car at Gunnar for 3, flipping the Slicer at end of combat. With Hidden on his second main playing out a mountain as land for turn, having to sacrifice his City of Traders to do so. Gunnar gets Slicer and untaps his command tower. He takes 2 from his ring and then draws 3 more cards with it. He then casts a Llanowar Elves and plays a Treasure Vault as land for turn, ending his turn recasting Kinnan. Gabe untaps and gets Slicer and heads straight to combat. Gabe is forced to send Slicer at Gunnar, who chumps with his elf, giving Hidden a treasure off the bandit tree. Then on his second main, Gabe is looking to buy some time and casts a Stasis. Hidden heads to his turn and skips his untap. He plays another mountain as land for turn and then heads the turn over. Luckily, Slicer does untap itself when it's given over. Gunnar gets the robot and takes 3 from his ring. A Lotus Petal then comes out, with him following that up with the City of Brass, as land. His Springleaf Drum is tapped, so he now has to attack Gabe with Slicer, who takes his first points of Slicer.
Alright, chat. Remember me. City of Brass, crack the Lotus Petal for 2. I will hardcast an Elvish Spirit Guide. Pass.
Gabe skips his untap and continues to pay for the Stasis. He gets Slicer and doesn't have anything else to do other than swing Slicer at Gunnar, who jumps with the guide, gaining Hidden another treasure. Hidden has a Mycosynth Guard in his land and Rending Volleys Kinnan, gaining another treasure in the process. Gunnar gets Slicer, takes 3 from his One Ring, and then plays a Misty Rainforest, cracking the land to grab out a Trop. Ending his turn, he swings another 6 at Gabe. Gabe skips his untap and has to let the Stasis go. He activates his Carpet for white and untaps his Growth Chamber, and then casts a Kiyora's Follower. He didn't find an answer to Slicer and heads to combat, finishing Gunnar off with Slicer and then handing the turnover after that. Hidden finally untaps and is safe from his crypt. He has another mountain and then hardcasts a Fury. The elemental ETBs and kills the follower, netting Hidden a treasure. 2 treasures are then cracked for Rose Gloves, with Hidden then moving his Greaves over to Fury to let him equip Slicer. He slides the Greaves back over and then heads to combat, sending 6 at Gabe and getting to draw 2 cards from the gloves. Gabe untaps, gets Slicer, and draws her turn. He heads to combat, attacking Hidden for 6, but is still lacking white mana to cast anything in hand, and gives the game over to Hidden.
Game review. Well, what can I say other than Slicer be slicing? I was worried at the start that I actually helped Kinnan accelerate his game plan. I thought it would just be over. But I guess it was fortunate for me, or unfortunate for him, that he just didn't draw into any of his combo pieces. Although speaking of drawing, Dan certainly did a bunch of that. But he didn't have any extra time to actually utilize all those cards under the pressure of Slicer. I think if he hadn't been drawing as many cards as he did, he could have politicked himself better at the table to help spread the Slicer damage around. As I certainly know that Gabe needed him around, as by the end of the game, his hand was full of white cards that he just couldn't cast. But that's just how some games go. And before everyone leaves, I want to thank our special Patreon members, Josh Schutt and Sly Fox, for their support of the channel, along with all of our other Patreon supporters as well. And as always, I want to thank all the people that played in these games. And remember, never give up, even if you're down on board. I'll see you guys later.